The first sound of the day at Hobbs Auto and Repair was always the same. A key in a lock, the specific resistance of a deadbolt that had been turned 10,000 times and had developed its own particular stiffness in cold weather. And then the low groan of the bay door rising on its track. And then silence. And then the smell. Cold concrete and old grease and something underneath that Nora Hobbs had never been able to name. Something that was simply the shop itself. The particular air of a building that had been worked in honestly for a long time. She stood in the open bay door for a moment the way she always did. Not because she needed to, because it was the only moment of the day that still felt like it belonged to her father. Route 220 was dark at 6 in the morning in October. The sky above the Laramie Range was just beginning to separate itself from the land, a thin line of gray along the ridge that had not decided yet whether it was going to be a good day or just another day. A semi pushed north toward Gillette, its running lights red and yellow in the dark. And then it was gone, and the highway was empty again, and Nora turned and walked into the shop and started the coffee. She was 38 years old. She had worked in this shop for 22 of those years. She knew every tool on the pegboard by its weight, every lift by the particular sound it made when it reached the top, every regular customer by the sound of their engine before they pulled into the lot. She had learned most of this from her father and the rest from simply being here, year after year. Long enough that the knowledge had stopped feeling like something she had acquired and started feeling like something she had always had. Harold Hobbs had opened the shop in 1987 with a set of secondhand tools, a two-car lift he bought off a bankrupt dealership in Cheyenne, and a loan from First Mountain Bank that took him 9 years to pay back. He had built the sign himself. Wood, not metal, because metal cost more. He had painted the letters by hand on a Saturday morning in 1993, while Nora, who was 7 years old, sat on an overturned oil drum and watched him work. She could not remember that morning. She had been told about it enough times that the memory felt real, but she knew the difference. What she actually remembered was later. The smell of the place before the lights came on. Cold concrete and old grease and something underneath that she had never been able to name. Her father's hands. The way he held a wrench, the way he held everything. Like it was exactly where it was supposed to be. He had taught her to change a tire when she was 7 years old. Not because he needed her to, because he believed, with the particular stubbornness of a man who had built everything he owned with his own hands, that his daughter should know how every single thing in her world worked. By the time she was 12, she could read an engine. By 14, she had rebuilt her first transmission on a 1973 Chevy pickup that belonged to a rancher named Dale, who brought it in every spring and always paid in cash and always left a folded 20 on the counter specifically for Nora, without explanation, as if the gesture were self-evident and did not require words. She had worked beside her father for 22 years, not because she had to, because there was nowhere else she wanted to be. He had died on a Thursday morning in March, 14 months before the October that this story is really about. Nora had been changing brake pads on a fleet vehicle when her phone rang. She had finished the brake job first, not because she did not care, because her father had taught her that you finished what you started, and she had needed something to be true in that moment that she already knew how to do. She had driven to the hospital in Casper with grease still on her hands and sat in a waiting room for 2 hours before a doctor came and told her what she already knew from the sound of her aunt's voice on the phone. She had cried once, alone in the hospital parking garage, 11 minutes, and then she had driven back to the shop and finished the rest of the day's work. The loan her father had left behind was $47,300. That was the number the bank had. That was the number Nora had been working against for 14 months, 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, keeping the evening shifts herself to save on labor costs, eating lunch standing at the register because sitting down felt like something she did not have time for. What the bank did not know, what no one knew because Harold Hobbs had never written it down anywhere official, was the other number. $11,400. Owed to a parts supplier named Garvey Whitlock out of Cheyenne, who had been extending Harold credit on handshake terms for the better part of 6 years, and who had called Nora 3 weeks after the funeral to say he was sorry for her loss and that there was no rush and that he trusted her the same way he had trusted her father. Nora had thanked him and hung up and sat with that number for about 30 seconds. Then she had taken the next car off the lot. That was how she handled things, not because she did not feel them. She felt them fine. Felt them the specific way you feel something when you have decided in advance that feeling it is not going to change anything. so you might as well keep moving. Her father had been the same way. She used to think it was a flaw. She had since decided it was the only reason either of them had ever gotten anything done. The coffee finished brewing at 6:14. She poured a cup and stood at the register and looked at the pegboard. Every tool in the order her father had established sometime in the late 90s, for reasons he had never fully explained beyond saying that there was a right place for everything and you saved yourself a lot of time if you always put things back in the right place. She had maintained that order without meaning to. It had simply never occurred to her to change it. There was a 19mm combination wrench on the work table beside the register. It had been there for as long as she could remember, never quite put away with the others, always within reach. Her father had bought it at a hardware liquidation sale in 2003 for 89 cents. She had never thought much about it until the night a man named Ray Callum had picked it up and turned it over in his hand and asked her if she knew what it meant. That night was 4 months ago. This morning, the wrench lay flat on the table right side up, and Nora set her coffee cup beside it and pulled the day's first work order and got to work. Ray Callum had come into Hobbs Auto and Repair on a Wednesday morning in early June, 3 months before the October this story is really about. He had arrived at 9:15 on a Harley-Davidson Road King that was, as far as Nora could determine after looking it over, in perfectly adequate mechanical condition. He had asked for an oil change. She had changed the oil. He had sat in the corner chair by the waiting area and drunk the coffee from the pot and read whatever magazine was on the side table, which at that point was a March issue of Popular Mechanics, and he had not said anything beyond the basic transactional minimum required to conduct the service. He was 63 years old, gray-haired, heavy across the shoulders in the way of men who had been physically strong for a very long time and whose bodies had not entirely forgotten it. He wore a flannel shirt, dark blue, and work boots that had seen actual work. He had the particular quality of stillness that some men carry with them the way other men carry noise, not withdrawal, not unfriendliness, simply the presence of a man who had learned somewhere along the way that most of what he needed to know about a room he could learn by watching it. He came back the following Wednesday. Same time, same chair, same coffee. A different magazine. He said he had heard something on the ride over. She looked at the bike, found nothing, and told him so. He nodded and said he appreciated it and paid for the service and left. By the third Wednesday, Nora had stopped pretending there was anything wrong with the motorcycle. She pulled it into the bay out of habit and left it parked and handed him his coffee without comment and went back to work. He sat in the corner chair and read his magazine. They conducted themselves in this way for the remainder of June and into July without either of them naming what the arrangement was. The other regulars at Hobbs Auto learned quickly not to try to make conversation with him. Not because he was rude, he was never rude, but because the answers he gave to questions were so precisely sufficient and so entirely free of any invitation to continue that people eventually stopped asking. He was simply there. Wednesday mornings, corner chair. That was the whole of what anyone could have said about him with confidence. What Nora noticed privately was that he watched the front windows. Not constantly, not in a way that would have been obvious to anyone paying only ordinary attention. But she had spent 22 years in this shop developing the particular peripheral awareness of someone who works with her hands and her eyes at the same time, and she had noticed in the first weeks that his gaze returned to the road at regular intervals. When a vehicle slowed in front of the lot without turning in, his stillness would shift quality, almost imperceptibly, into something with more weight behind it, something that was paying attention in a specific direction. She had not said anything about it. Neither had he. Some things between people do not require language to be functional. It was a Wednesday evening in late July when the thing with the wrench happened. He had been the last customer of the day. She had finished with the Road King by 7:30, and he had been sitting in the corner chair long enough that she had refilled his coffee twice without being asked. Outside, the lot had gone dark. The highway noise had thinned to the occasional truck. The bulb on the eastern streetlight pole was out. It had been out for 3 weeks, and apparently nobody had reported it yet, or the county had not gotten around to it, which was the same outcome from a practical standpoint. She had been counting the register when she said it, not looking at him. Just set it into the air the way you say things you have been carrying too long to keep carrying alone. Third time this week somebody has driven past after closing and slowed down. Ray did not answer right away. He set his coffee cup on his knee and looked at the front window for a moment. Same car, he said. Or different cars, same slow. Same car, Nora said. Dark sedan. I cannot get the plates from inside. He nodded, the way a man nods when something he suspected has been confirmed. Nora put the register drawer back and leaned against the counter. She was not the kind of woman who asked for things. Her father had not raised her to be. But she was also not the kind of woman who pretended not to see what she could plainly see. And what she could plainly see was that she was alone in this building most nights. The building sat on a stretch of Route 220 where the nearest neighbor was a closed bait shop a quarter-mile east. You ever think about a dog? Ray said. Cannot afford a dog right now. He almost smiled. Almost. He was quiet for another moment. Then he stood up from the chair and walked to the work table beside the register. He looked at the tools laid out on it, the order her father had established. He picked up the 19mm combination wrench, turned it over once in his hand, set it back down on the table upside down. You know what that means, he said. Nora looked at the wrench. Upside down. Means somebody put it back wrong. Means something is wrong, Ray said. In certain places, to certain people, an upside-down wrench on a workbench means the person who put it there needs somebody to stay. Your father used it. In the chapter years ago, if a prospect came into the shop and something fell off, a meeting going wrong, somebody in the room who should not be there, he would flip a wrench on the bench, and whoever saw it knew to hold their position. Do not leave. Do not make a move. Just stay. Nora looked at the wrench. Then she looked at him. My father was in a chapter. I was in a chapter, Ray said. He said it the way you say something that used to be a large thing and has since become simply a fact. Iron Valley. 20 years. Your father was not in it. But he knew men who were. He did something for those men once. Did not ask what it was for. Did not ask to be paid. He paused. I am here because of that, Ray said. Not to explain it. Not to make it into something it was not. Just because your father was the kind of man who is worth showing up for, and he is not here anymore, and the shop is. Nora stood at the counter for a moment, and the highway outside went quiet, and the only sound in the shop was the fluorescent light above the bay that had been developing a slight flicker since August that she had not yet had time to fix. She did not ask him what he had done in the chapter for 20 years. He had not offered it as an invitation. There are things you can know about a person without being told them directly, and one of those things is when a subject has been set down and is not going to be picked back up. He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair and shook it on. Then he stopped at the door and looked back at her. If there is ever a night somebody comes in here and you need somebody to not leave, he said, put that wrench upside down on the table. I will see it. And if you are not here, Nora said. I will be here, Ray said. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once and went quiet. Nora stood at the counter and watched his taillight disappear north on Route 220. Then she reached out and turned the wrench right side up and went back to closing out the register. She did not think about it consciously after that, but on the nights she worked late, and there were many of them, more than there should have been, she noticed without quite meaning to that the wrench was always on that table, always in that spot, always within reach. The phone call from the bank had come at 8:17 on a Tuesday morning in October, the day before the night this story is really about. Nora had been under a Ford F-250 at the time, replacing a rear differential that had been grinding since sometime in the previous administration. She let the call go to voicemail, finished the differential, wiped her hands, and listened to the message standing in the bay with the engine still ticking beside her. The payment was short by $1,214. The bank was prepared to work with her, the message said, in the particular tone that banks use when they are not prepared to work with her, but would prefer she believe otherwise. She had until the end of the month. She put the phone in her pocket and took the next car off the lot. By noon, she had taken in 4 more vehicles. By 3 in the afternoon, she had finished 2, billed 1 customer for parts she had been waiting 3 weeks to get paid for, and eaten half a sandwich standing at the register because sitting down still felt like something she did not have time for. She ran the numbers in her head while she worked. Not because running them changed anything, because not running them was worse. There was a regularity to the math of a small business that nobody outside of one fully understood. It was not about the big numbers, not really. It was about the gap between when money was owed to you and when money was owed by you, and the particular discipline of managing that gap when you were doing it alone, without a second person to share the carrying, without a margin wide enough to absorb a bad week without feeling it in your chest. Her father had managed it for 36 years. She had watched him do it. She had learned the rhythm of it by proximity, the same way she had learned the order of the tools on the pegboard. She had not known she was learning it at the time. She knew now. Dale Pruitt had spent that same Tuesday doing what he did every day before a job, running the route. He was 41 years old, and he had been doing this particular kind of work for 11 years, and he had never once been caught, which he attributed entirely to the fact that he was careful in a way that most men who did what he did were not. They were impatient. They took the first opportunity that looked good. He took the fifth. He drove the route until the route had no surprises left in it, until he had accounted for every variable he could account for, and then he made his decision. He had first noticed Hobbs Auto and Repair 3 weeks earlier. He had been driving Route 220 at 9:45 at night and the lights were still on, and there was a single car in the lot and a woman working alone under a lift with the bay door half open. He had slowed without intending to, had circled the block, had noted the register position, the sight lines, the distance from the nearest intersection. He had come back twice more in the following weeks. Once in the morning to look at the traffic pattern in the neighboring properties. Once in the afternoon to watch the rhythm of customers coming and going and to establish in his mind the approximate time the last regular left for the day. A rancher in a mud-caked Silverado had pulled out at 4:52. The woman had pulled the bay door halfway down at 5:30, the way she did every evening, regardless of whether she was done for the day or not. He had also come in once as a customer, a Tuesday afternoon in September, 3 weeks before the October night. He had driven in with a noise he claimed to hear in the front left wheel. She had looked at the wheel, found nothing, charged him for the inspection, and sent him on his way with the kind of professional straightforwardness that told him she was competent and busy and paying attention to the car in front of her rather than the man standing beside it. He had noted the layout of the shop, the position of the bay door from the inside, the distance from the front register to the back of the repair area, the pegboard, the location of the key rack, the single corridor between the waiting area and the bay. He had noted the old man in the corner chair. He had categorized him the way Dale Pruitt categorized everything in a room he intended to enter at night. Gray hair, flannel shirt, coffee cup, magazine. No visible concern about anything. He had registered the old man the way you register a piece of furniture that does not block the path you intend to walk. Present, stationary, not a factor. That assessment had seemed correct at the time. It would seem considerably less correct later. On the Tuesday morning of the phone call from the bank, Dale had driven Route 220 at 7:10 and 2. He confirmed the street light on the eastern pole was still out. He confirmed the closed bait shop a quarter-mile east still had no activity. He confirmed that the nearest intersection was far enough away that the sound of a vehicle stopping in the lot would not be audible from it. He made his decision the way he always made his decisions. Not with excitement, not with hesitation, with the specific calm of a man whose method has worked 11 times and who has no reason to believe the 12th will be different. He called Trent in Delvoye that afternoon. Trent Bodecker was 26 years old and 230 pounds and had never in his life had a problem moving someone who did not want to be moved. He was not subtle and he was not strategic, but he was useful in the way that a large, certain object is useful when you need something to stay where you put it. Delvoye Marsh was 31 and quieter than Trent and had a way of moving through a space that suggested he had already mentally mapped every exit before he walked through the entrance. He was the one Dale sent into the repair bay. He was the one who used the flashlight. They met at a truck stop off I-25 at 8 o'clock Tuesday evening and went over it the way Dale went over everything. Not with a plan written on paper. Plans written on paper were for men who needed to remember because they were not paying attention in the first place. Just a conversation. Specific, brief, and then done. In and out in under 20 minutes. 3 people, maximum. 1 register, 1 key rack, no complications. The woman would cooperate because cooperating was the rational decision. And in Dale Pruitt's 11 prior jobs, rational people made rational decisions when presented with the appropriate motivation. He had been right about that 11 times. He had not known, driving south on Route 220 toward Hobbs Auto and Repair at 9:30 the following night, that rational people were not the variable he needed to be accounting for. Ray Callum had come back to the shop that Tuesday evening at 6:51. He had not planned to. He had been on the Road King heading toward a diner on the south end of Rollins that he liked for the coffee and the particular quality of its late-day quiet. He had turned onto Route 220 instead, without fully deciding to. The way the body sometimes makes decisions that the mind is still working on. He had seen the light in the bay from 300 yards out. He turned in and parked at the edge of the lot without announcement. "You just had that bike in 2 days ago," Nora said without looking up from the engine compartment she was leaning over. "Heard something on the way over," Ray said. She looked at him for a moment. He looked at the bike. "Pull it in," she said. He sat in the corner chair and drank his coffee and read his magazine while she went over the Road King that needed nothing gone over. Outside, the lot had gone dark by 7:30. The highway traffic had thinned to the occasional truck. At 8:45, a dark sedan pulled into the lot across the road by the abandoned bait shop and sat there with its engine running. Ray looked up from his magazine once. Then he looked back down. Nora had not seen the sedan. She was in the back working on a clutch assembly that needed to be ready by 7 the next morning. At 9:15, the sedan pulled out and drove north. At 9:22, it came back south and parked 2 lots down. Engine off. Ray set his magazine on his knee. At 9:40, he heard a second car, then a third. He did not say anything to Nora. There was nothing to say that would have been more useful than staying where he was and waiting to see what the next few minutes brought. He had learned over 20 years of situations that required exactly this kind of patience, that the most dangerous thing a man could do was move before he understood the full shape of what he was moving into. Sometime between 8:45 and 9:40, he sent a text message to a number in his phone that was not labeled with a name. 4 words, Route 220, Hobbs Auto. He did not tell Nora. There was nothing to tell yet that would have been more useful than what he was already doing. At 9:47, the front door opened. Nora spun around from the lift she was working beside. Ray turned the last page of his magazine, closed it, and set it on the chair beside him. He had already done the math. 3 men, 2 entry points, 1 sight line from the register to the bay. He knew which one would come for him first. He knew what he would do when that happened. He knew what came after that. What he had not let himself think about directly, the way you do not look straight at something that might change your decision if you look at it too long, was the particular feeling of sitting in a corner chair in a small auto shop in Rollins, Wyoming, and understanding that the thing he had driven 4 states in 3 years to get away from had followed him here anyway. Not the violence. He had made his peace with the violence a long time ago, in a specific and irreversible way that had cost him more than he was going to think about right now. The feeling of being needed, that was the thing he had not figured out how to leave behind. That was the thing he had not known was still in him, until a woman he barely knew set a wrench upside down on a table, and he stood up from a chair without hesitation and understood that he had been waiting for exactly that moment since the first Wednesday morning he had walked through that door. The bell above the door had not even finished ringing, and Nora Hobbs, standing 30 feet away with a clutch assembly in her hands, was already moving. Not away, not toward the door, sideways toward the work table, toward the register, toward the thing she needed to reach before the next 10 seconds made reaching it impossible. Her hand found the key tray. That was the natural movement, the one she had made 1,000 times. Her hand found the key tray, and then her hand found the wrench. She set it down on the table without looking at it, upside down. One motion, the same motion she used for everything in the shop. Efficient, unhurried, like it was simply the next thing in a long list of things that needed doing tonight. Dale Pruitt, standing 6 inches behind her left shoulder, did not look at the table. He was looking at the register. In the corner by the waiting chairs, Ray Callum had already set his magazine down, both hands flat on his knees, eyes up. The bell above the door was still moving on its hinge when Dale Pruitt took his first step toward the register. He had planned for a lot of things. He had planned for a woman who screamed. He had planned for a woman who ran. He had planned for a woman who went very still and very quiet and did exactly what she was told, because the rational mind, when confronted with a specific kind of threat in a specific kind of space, almost always arrives at the same conclusion, which is that the fastest way to the other side of this is compliance. He had not planned for a woman who reached sideways while he was standing 6 inches behind her left shoulder and set a wrench on a table with the same unhurried efficiency she used for everything else in the shop, and then turned to face him with both hands visible and her breathing at the same rate it had been when he walked in. He noted it, filed it, did not know what to do with it yet, so he set it aside. Trent came through the door behind him and moved immediately to the left, positioning himself between Nora and the front entrance the way they had talked about. The way Trent always did, because it was the one piece of spatial reasoning he had reliably absorbed in 11 jobs. His size was the point. 230 pounds filling a doorway communicated something that words took longer to say. Delvoye went right, through the half-open door into the repair bay, flashlight already in his hand, moving with the particular economy of someone who had already mapped the room in his mind and was simply confirming the map against reality. The flashlight swept across the back wall, across the lift, across the clutch assembly Nora had set down on the workbench when she heard the glass go. The glass. That was the first sound. Dale's elbow through the small display case beside the front door, the one that held key fobs and car care products, and a hand-lettered sign that said "Open" that Harold Hobbs had made in 1989, and that Nora had never replaced because it still said what it needed to say. The glass came down on the concrete, not with a crash, but with a collapse, like something that had been waiting a long time to give. Nora had not flinched at the sound. She noted it and continued moving toward the register the way she moved toward everything, with the measured purpose of a woman who has learned that stopping is more expensive than continuing. Lock turned behind them, Dale said, not looking back. He heard the bolt slide. Delvoye from the bay confirmed the rear exit in 3 words. Back door clear. 30 seconds. The whole entrance, start to finish. 11 jobs, and the timing had never varied by more than 4 seconds in either direction. Dale was proud of that the way a craftsman is proud of consistency. Privately, without needing to say it out loud. Now he stepped up to the register. He was close enough that Nora could hear him breathing. She was looking at him in a way he had not seen before in 11 jobs. Not defiance, not terror. Something in between those two things that had its own quality, its own weight. The look of a person who has already assessed the situation and arrived at a conclusion she has not yet decided whether to share. He did not like that look. He filed it alongside the other thing he had not known what to do with. Open the register, he said. Nora opened the register. She had made the decision sometime in the past 45 seconds that the register was not the thing she was going to make a stand over tonight. The register held $412 in mixed bills and a coin tray. It was not the thing her father had spent 36 years building. It was just money. Money was replaceable. She stepped back from the register and kept her hands visible. Keys, Dale said. She pointed to the rack on the wall to his left. 8 sets. Customer vehicles in the lot overnight, a couple belonging to regulars who left their cars for early morning service. Dale looked at the rack and nodded to himself. That was when Trent came across the waiting area. He moved the way large men move when they have spent enough time using their size as an argument that the movement itself becomes a language. Not aggressive exactly, just certain. The certainty of a man who has learned that his physical presence does most of the work before he has to do any of it. He reached Nora in 4 steps and took her left arm above the elbow and walked her backward into the pegboard wall. The impact was controlled. A placement. This is where you will be now. The hooks on the pegboard caught her across the shoulders and upper back. A row of metal points that had held wrenches and pliers and socket sets for 30 years, and that now pressed into her shoulder blades through the fabric of her workshirt with a specific insistence that was somewhere between pressure and pain. She did not make a sound. A wrench dropped from the board where her impact had disturbed it. Her father had hung it there sometime around 1991, a 3/8 drive ratchet that lived in the same spot it had always lived in, because that was where Harold Hobbs had decided it belonged. It rang off the concrete floor with a sound like a struck bell and spun twice and came to rest against the base of the wall. Neither Nora nor Trent looked at it. Trent was looking at her face. He was looking for the thing he expected to find there, the particular expression that meant the room had been correctly arranged and all the variables were in their proper positions. He was not finding it. He adjusted his grip on her arm. She let him. She was not looking at Trent at all. She was looking at the corner chair. Ray had set his magazine down, both hands flat on his knees the way she had first seen him sit when he was simply waiting, simply present, in the way he was present in that corner chair every Wednesday morning. The paper coffee cup was still on the armrest where he had set it 20 minutes ago. He was looking at her. No, he was looking at the table, at the wrench. The upside-down wrench on the work table beside the register which Dale Pruitt was currently standing in front of and looking entirely past because he was interested in the register and the key rack and the specific amounts they contained, and not in the arrangement of tools on the table beside them. Ray looked at the wrench for 1 second. Then he looked at Nora. She held his gaze for the same second. She had made a decision, and she needed him to know she had made it deliberately. Not from panic, not from the pressure of Trent's hand on her arm, or the hooks in her back, or the sound of Delvoye moving through the bay behind her. She had looked at the situation with the same unhurried assessment she brought to every problem that came through the door of this shop, and she had decided that this particular problem required a specific tool, and she had reached for it, and she needed him to understand that. He understood. He stood up from the corner chair. He did not stand up the way you stand up when you are startled, or the way you stand up when you are trying to make yourself large. He stood up the way you stand up when you have been sitting for a while, and the next part of the day requires you to be vertical. One motion, unhurried, the paper coffee cup undisturbed on the armrest, his hands coming down to his sides where they simply rested. Trent saw him. Trent was 26 years old, and he had a reliable method for evaluating the people in a room when he walked into one, a method based primarily on size and age, in the presence or absence of visible indicators of danger. The old man in the flannel shirt had not registered as a variable on Trent's entry assessment. 63 years old, gray-haired, sitting in a corner chair reading a magazine. Furniture. He registered differently now. There was something in the way the man was standing that Trent did not have a word for, but that his body recognized before his mind did. A particular quality of readiness that had nothing to do with size or posture or any of the things Trent usually looked for. It lived in the stillness, the specific, weighted stillness of a man who had already decided what the next 10 seconds were going to look like and was simply waiting for them to begin. Trent made a decision. He released Nora's arm and came across the waiting area. He came the way he always came. Unhurried, certain, already thinking about what came after. He had never once in his life had a problem moving someone who did not want to be moved. He had moved men larger than himself. He had moved men who thought they were ready. He came across the waiting area like a man who had performed this particular action many times and expected the result to be the same as it had always been. What happened in the next 3 seconds did not look like a fight. It did not look like anything Trent had a word for. Ray's left hand came up and found Trent's right wrist and did something small and specific with it, a movement that was almost gentle in its precision. The way a key turning in a well-maintained lock is gentle, just the right amount of force applied in exactly the right direction. And then Trent was on the floor. He was looking at the ceiling. His wrist was sending information to his brain that his brain was having difficulty processing. The information suggested something had gone wrong with the wrist in a way that would require professional attention. The ceiling had water stains in 2 places he had not noticed from his previous vantage point. He was thinking about these things with the particular fragmented focus of a man whose body has just received news his mind has not yet caught up with. He did not get up. Ray was standing in exactly the position he had been standing in before, hands at his sides, breathing unchanged. The paper coffee cup was still on the armrest of the corner chair behind him. He had not moved more than 2 feet from where he started. The flashlight in the repair bay went still. Delvoye came through the bay door in a hurry. He had heard the sound of Trent going down, which was not a dramatic sound but was specific enough that Delvoye recognized what it was and what it meant, and had come through the door faster than he intended to move in this space. He saw Trent on the floor. He saw the old man standing in the middle of the waiting area with his hands at his sides. He registered that the math of the situation had changed in a way he did not fully understand yet. He made the decision that men make when they are angry and confused, and those 2 things are moving faster than their judgment. He came in anyway. He led with his right hand. Ray stepped left, not fast, just left. 1 step, the way you step around something on a sidewalk when you see it in time. Delvoye's fist went past his ear, and Ray's elbow came back and caught the side of Delvoye's head with the particular efficiency of a man who has made this exact motion so many times that it no longer requires him to think about it. It is simply what the body does next. Delvoye's legs went wrong beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the waiting room table on the way down and took it with him, and the magazines that had been sitting on it fanned across the concrete floor in a wide arc, and nobody looked at them. The shop went completely silent. Dale Pruitt had not moved from where he was standing. He was 6 feet from Nora and 12 feet from Ray, And he was doing the thing his brain does when it receives information that contradicts something it believed to be permanently settled. His eyes went from Trent to Delvoye, from Delvoye to the old man, from the old man back to Trent. Trent had not moved from the floor. Delvoye was not moving from the floor. The old man was standing in the middle of the waiting area with his hands at his sides and his breathing at the same rate it had been when he was sitting in the corner chair reading his magazine. There was no expression on Ray Callum's face that Dale could name. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the particular brightness that some men get when violence goes their way. Just presence. The specific, undiluted presence of a man who is exactly where he intended to be. Dale had built his entire operation on reading people, on knowing within the first 30 seconds of walking into a room who was going to be a problem and who was not. He had read this room when he walked in. He had cataloged the woman behind the register and the position of the cash drawer and the sight lines to the bay and the old man in the corner chair who had not moved and had not spoken and who had cost him exactly 0 seconds of concern on entry. He understood now that this had been a mistake. He understood it the way you understand something that the body knows before the mind catches up. In the chest first, then the stomach, then finally, reluctantly, in the part of the brain responsible for honest accounting. His hand moved to his waistband. The gun came out. He raised it across 12 feet of concrete and held it level with Ray's chest, and his hand was steadier than he felt, which was the one thing still working correctly tonight. Ray looked at the gun, then he looked at Dale. He did not step back, did not raise his hands, did not change his breathing or his posture or the particular quality of stillness that had been radiating off him since the moment he stood up from that chair. He looked at Dale the way a man looks at something he has already seen the end of. "You do not want to do that," Ray said. "Not a warning, not a plea. The way you tell someone the stove is hot. Plain and patient, like you would genuinely prefer they learn it some other way. But you have said what you can say, and the rest is up to them." Dale's jaw tightened. The gun did not move, but his eyes were doing something they had not done in 11 previous jobs, in 11 previous rooms, in 11 previous moments exactly like this one. They were uncertain. Across the room, Nora had not moved from the pegboard wall. Her feet had fully found the floor, her weight settled and even, and she was watching the old man in the flannel shirt stand in the middle of her father's shop with a gun pointed at his chest. And she was thinking one thing. He is not afraid, not performing calm, not holding himself together through effort. Simply not afraid. The way a man is not afraid of something he has already survived so many times that it has lost the ability to surprise him. She had known this about him in some way she could not have articulated since the first Wednesday he sat in that corner chair and looked at the front windows. She had known it the night he turned the wrench over in his hand and told her about the chapter and about her father. But she knew it differently now, watching it in real time. Watching a man stand with a gun at his chest and experience it as something he had already accounted for. She thought about the wrench on the table. She thought about what it had cost her to set it down the way she had and what it had meant. And she understood, standing against the pegboard wall with her father's hooks pressing into her shoulders, that she had not done it because she could not handle what was happening. She had done it because Ray Callum had come into this shop every Wednesday for 4 months to be in exactly this position, and she had decided that he deserved to be allowed to do the thing he had come here to do. That was a different thing entirely. That was a choice, not a surrender. Dale took 3 steps forward. The barrel of the gun touched Ray's sternum. Ray looked down at it for 1 second, then he looked back up at Dale. Dale felt something in that look that he did not have a word for, and would spend a considerable amount of time afterward trying to find one. It was not defiance. He knew defiance. Defiance was just fear that had decided to dress up and go out. This was something underneath defiance. Something that defiance was built on top of, the way a house is built on ground that was there long before anyone thought to put a house on it. This man had been here before. Not a room like this one. This room. This exact configuration of threat and consequence, and the specific silence that falls when everyone present understands that the next 30 seconds are going to determine something permanent. Dale could see it in the way Ray was standing. Not braced, not tense, just settled, the way a fence post is settled, like he had put his roots down into this particular moment a long time ago and was simply waiting for Dale to figure out what he already knew. "On your knees," Dale said. Ray did not move. "On your knees," Dale said again. Harder this time. The hardness was supposed to sound like certainty. He was not entirely sure it did. Ray looked at him. "Think about what you are doing," he said. Quiet. Not asking, not threatening. The way a man lays out the terms of something before the other party makes a decision they cannot walk back from. You came in here for a register and some car keys. That is what this was. Think about what it is now. Dale's jaw tightened. It is whatever I say it is. No, Ray said. It stopped being that about 4 minutes ago. Something moved across Dale's face. Fast and then gone. He pressed the barrel harder against Ray's sternum. Last chance, he said. Knees, now. Ray looked at him for a long moment. The kind of long that has weight to it. The kind that makes the air in a room feel different. Then he said no. One word, flat and final as a door closing. Dale had been in rooms with dangerous men before. He had been in rooms with men who were bigger than him, and angrier than him, and more heavily armed than him, and he had never once in 11 jobs felt what he felt in the 2 seconds after that word landed. The closest thing he had to a name for it was this. This man has already decided how this ends, and he is not afraid of the answer. Dale's finger moved toward the trigger. Ray reached into his shirt pocket. Dale's gun hand came up another half-inch. Ray pulled out a phone, looked at it once, made a call. 4 words spoken quietly into it, the same 4 words he had sent as a text message hours earlier. Route 220, Hobbs Auto. Then he put the phone back in his pocket and looked at Dale again. 12 minutes, Ray said. I would use them carefully. Dale's mouth opened, closed. To understand why those 2 words drained the certainty from Dale Pruitt's face, the way water drains from a cracked basin, slow and then all at once, you needed to understand something about the kind of call Ray Callum had just made. Not the number, not the words. The fact that he made it without hesitation, without checking, without any of the small behavioral indicators of a man who is not sure his call is going to be answered. He had made it the way you make a call to someone who has been waiting to hear from you. Dale looked at Trent on the floor, at Delvoye against the wall, at the old man standing 12 feet away with a gun pressed against his chest, and the specific, patient expression of a man who has nowhere else to be and nothing else he would rather be doing. He looked at the front windows. Nothing yet, just the dark lot in the dark highway and the broken streetlight on the eastern pole that had been out for 3 weeks and that now felt for the first time like a detail he should have looked at differently. His hand was still up. The gun was still level. But something had gone out of the room that a gun requires in order to be what it is. Some essential quality that lives not in the metal, but in the certainty of the person holding it. And that certainty had been departing from Dale Pruitt by degrees since the moment Trent hit the floor. And what was left of it now was not enough to build anything on. He pressed the barrel harder against Ray's sternum. One more time, the gesture of a man who is running out of gestures. Ray did not move. 8 minutes passed. They were the longest 8 minutes in Dale Pruitt's life. And he spent them standing in the middle of a small auto shop in Rawlins, Wyoming, holding a gun against the chest of a man who was not afraid of it, listening to Trent breathe on the floor behind him and to the faint sound of Delvoye shifting against the wall and to the highway outside, going about its business with complete indifference to what was happening inside. Nora stood against the pegboard wall and did not move and did not speak. There was nothing to say that would have been more useful than staying where she was. She had put the wrench upside down on the table. She had done her part. Now she watched. The sound came faint at first, then building, then filling the lot the way weather fills a valley, all at once and from every direction. Engines. Not one, not two. The kind of sound that has physical weight before it has a source. The kind that arrives in the sternum before it arrives in the ears. Dale's eyes went to the windows. The first headlights swept across the shop front, then 4 more behind them. Then another 3, and 2 more after that, and by the time the last set of lights turned into the lot of Hobbs Auto and Repair on Route 220, the whole front of the shop was lit up the way a room is lit when every light in it gets switched on at once. 14 motorcycles. They came in without hurry and parked in a line across the front of the lot and cut their engines one by one until the last one went quiet. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that is louder than the noise that preceded it, because your body is still braced for the noise and the absence of it lands like a physical thing. Nobody got off their bike. Nobody came to the door. They sat in the dark lot in a long line, engines ticking as they cooled, headlights cutting through the shop windows and laying long rectangles of pale light across the concrete floor, across the magazines fanned out from the fallen table, across the 3/8 ratchet that had fallen from the pegboard and come to rest against the baseboard, and they waited. With the patience of men who have nowhere else to be, with the patience of men who already know how this particular story ends. Dale stood with the gun barrel against Ray's sternum and looked at 14 silhouettes sitting on 14 motorcycles in the parking lot of a small auto shop in Rawlins, Wyoming, and felt the full weight of what he had walked into tonight settle onto him all at once. Not gradually, all at once. The way cold settles when you have been outside long enough that your body stops arguing with it. He had done the math when he walked in. He had done it carefully. One woman, one register, 6 sets of car keys, an old man in a corner chair who had not moved and had not spoken, and who had cost him exactly 0 seconds of concern. He had not accounted for this. He had not accounted for any of this. His arm was still up, the gun was still level, but something had gone out of it, some essential quality that a gun requires in order to be what it is. Both of them knew it. Only one of them was still pretending otherwise. "Who are they?" Dale said. His voice had changed. Something structural had left it. Ray did not answer right away. He looked out at the lot for a moment, at the 14 riders sitting in the dark, patient and still. Then he looked back at Dale with the expression of a man who is about to say something true. "Men who remember," Ray said. Dale looked at the window, at the silhouettes, at the particular quality of stillness coming off 14 men who were waiting because they had been asked to wait, which is a different kind of stillness than the stillness of men who simply have nothing to do. He looked back at Ray. Ray's hand came up slowly, slowly enough that Dale could have stopped it, could have stepped back, could have made any one of several decisions that would have changed what happened next. He did not stop it. Ray took the gun out of Dale's hand. Dale's fingers opened and the gun was gone, and he stood there with his empty hand at his side and the full understanding of the last 20 minutes arriving in him all at once. He had walked into this shop with a system that had worked 11 times. 11 rooms, 11 registers, 11 people who had made the rational decision that cooperating was safer than not cooperating, and 11 times Dale had walked out with what he came for and the absolute confidence of a man whose method has never failed him. He had walked into the one room where the method was always going to fail. Not because of the gun, not because of the men in the parking lot, because of a 63-year-old man in a flannel shirt who had looked at a woman working alone on a dark stretch of highway and decided 6 months ago on a Wednesday evening that she deserved to have somebody stay. That was the thing Dale Pruitt had not accounted for. That was the only thing that had ever mattered. Ray set the gun on the counter behind him. He looked at Dale for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the particular steadiness of a man who has done what he came to do and is now simply present for whatever comes next. "Sit down," Ray said, "and wait." Dale sat down in the waiting chair, the one Ray had been sitting in when they walked in, the one with the paper coffee cup still on the armrest. He put his hands on his knees and he looked at the floor. He did not say another word. Outside on Route 220, the first siren became audible. Distant, thin, then a second behind it. Then the red and blue light began painting the front windows of Hobbs Auto and Repair in slow rotating arcs, the way it always does, arriving after everything that mattered has already been decided, confirming the outcome rather than determining it, the official notation at the bottom of a page that had already been written by other hands. Nora was still standing against the pegboard wall. The hooks had released their pressure when Trent stepped away, but she had not moved yet. Her back ached in a line across both shoulder blades, a row of small specific points that would be bruised by morning. Her hands were back to their normal temperature. Her breathing was even. She was looking at Ray, who was standing at the counter with his hands flat on the surface, looking at the front windows, waiting for the police the way you wait for a bus. Without urgency, without performance, simply present. She thought about the wrench on the table, about the night he had shown her what it meant, about the specific way he had said it, not as an offer, not as a transaction, just as a fact being stated. If there is ever a night somebody comes in here and you need somebody to not leave. She had put the wrench upside down without looking at it. He had stood up without looking at her. And between those two moments, between the signal and the response, there had been something that did not have a name in any language she knew, but that she understood completely. Something that had less to do with the wrench and more to do with the specific quality of trust that exists between two people who have each decided, separately and without discussion, that the other one is worth showing up for. The door opened. The first officer came through with his hand on his holster and swept the room in one practiced motion. Trent on the floor, Delvoye against the wall, Dale in the chair, the old man at the counter, the woman by the pegboard wall. He said the words they always say, the words that mean it is over, the words that arrive after everything that actually mattered has already happened in the silence before them. Nora exhaled. She had not known she was still holding it. The police arrived in stages the way they always do. Two cruisers first, pulling into the lot with their lights going, and then a third angling in from the north, and then an ambulance that parked at the edge of the lot with its back doors already open before it had fully stopped. The 14 motorcycles were still in their line across the front of the property, engines cold now, riders still seated, and the first officer through the door had paused for half a second when he saw them. The way you pause when the scene in front of you contains more variables than the dispatcher prepared you for. He recovered quickly. That was his job. The next 40 minutes moved in the particular rhythm of official procedure, which is slower than urgency and faster than patience, and conducted in a specific register of voice that is neither warm nor cold but simply functional. Trent Bodecker's wrist was examined by a paramedic who confirmed what Trent already knew, that something had gone wrong with it in a way that required imaging. He was transported to the hospital with his right arm immobilized and his eyes at the middle distance of a man still processing the gap between what he expected to happen tonight and what had actually happened. Delvoye Marsh had a concussion. The paramedic confirmed it at the scene, asked him a series of questions he answered slowly and in the wrong order, and told him he would feel it on and off for several weeks, which turned out to be an accurate prediction. He sat against the wall with a cold pack against the side of his head and did not speak. Dale Pruitt said nothing from the moment the first officer walked through the door to the moment they put him in the back of the cruiser. Not one word. He sat in the waiting chair with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the floor, and he did not look up when the handcuffs went on. He looked like a man who had arrived somewhere he had not planned to arrive and was still working out the route that had brought him here. Detective Sandra Harlow arrived at 10:19 in a gray sedan that she parked at the edge of the lot. She was broad-shouldered and unhurried, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to people who have been doing a specific thing long enough that nothing about it surprises them anymore. She stood outside for a moment and looked at the 14 motorcycles before she walked in. Her expression did not change, but she looked at them the way you look at something that confirms a thing you already suspected. She walked through their shop slowly, the broken display case by the front door, the magazines fanned across the floor from the overturned table, the 3/8 ratchet still lying where it had fallen from the pegboard, the gun on the counter. She took in each of these things without comment, making the kind of notes that experienced investigators make, which are less about what they see and more about what the arrangement of what they see tells them about the sequence of events that produced it. Then she walked over to Ray, who had returned to his corner chair and was sitting with his paper coffee cup, which was empty now but which he had not set down, as if the familiar weight of it was sufficient reason to keep holding it. She looked at him for a moment. "You want to tell me what happened here?" she said. "3 men came in," Ray said. "They left when asked." Harlow looked at Trent's empty space on the floor, at the scuff marks on the concrete where Delvoye had gone down. She looked back at Ray. "That how you would describe it," she said. "That is how I would describe it," Ray said. She wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked at him again with the particular focus of a person trying to place a face they almost recognize, not from a photograph, but from a story told to them a long time ago. "Ray Callum," she said. Not a question. Ray looked at her. "Iron Valley," she said quietly. "My father worked property crimes in this county for 22 years. He mentioned your name twice in all that time. Both times like he was being careful about it. Like the name had a certain weight to it that he did not want to put down carelessly." Ray did not say anything. He held her gaze with the same steady patience he brought to everything and waited to see what came next. Harlow nodded once, slowly. The way you nod when you receive information that completes a picture you have been looking at for a long time without knowing what was missing from the center of it. She wrote something else in her notebook. Then she closed it. "We will need statements," she said. "From both of you. Tomorrow morning is fine." She said this to Ray and then turned and said it again to Nora, who was standing near the pegboard wall. 9 o'clock at the station. She walked back toward the door, paused, looked once more at the line of motorcycles through the front window. Then she walked out. Outside, the 14 motorcycles started up one by one in the same order they had arrived, which was an order that meant something to the people in that line, even if it meant nothing to anyone watching from outside it. Their headlights swept across the shop windows one final time. 14 long arcs of light moving across the concrete floor and up the pegboard wall and across the tools hanging in the order Harold Hobbs had established. And then they were gone. Pulling north on Route 220 and disappearing into the dark, the way thunder disappears after a storm has already decided it is finished. Within 4 minutes, the lot was empty. No names had been exchanged. No words had been spoken between the riders and anyone inside. Just engines fading into the night, and then silence, and then the ordinary sound of Route 220 resuming its business. Nora stood in the middle of her father's shop and listened to them go. She stood there for a while after the last engine faded, in the particular silence that follows the end of something significant, and she looked at the shop around her. The broken case by the door, the fallen table, the magazines on the floor, the ratchet against the baseboard. All of it was fixable. All of it was just the physical evidence of a night that was over, and the morning would come, and the morning after that, and she would fix it the way she fixed everything, with her hands and her time and the specific patience of a woman who understood that a thing being damaged did not mean a thing was lost. Her back ached where the hooks had caught her. She would be bruised by morning, a row of small, precise points across her shoulder blades that she would feel every time she reached overhead for the next week. She noted this the way she noted everything, factually, as information relevant to the next several days. Ray was still in the corner chair. He had set the empty coffee cup back on the armrest and was looking at the front windows, at the empty lot, at the place where the 14 motorcycles had been. Nora walked to the work table and picked up the 19-millimeter wrench. She turned it over once in her hand, the same way Ray had turned it over the night he explained it to her, and then she set it back down in its spot on the table, right side up. Ray watched her do this. He did not say anything. Neither did she. That was the last thing that happened that night at Hobbs Auto and Repair on Route 220. The investigation took 6 weeks. Dale Pruitt's phone, recovered from his jacket pocket at the scene, contained records of 11 prior jobs across 3 states. Locations, dates, amounts taken, notes about each target written in the abbreviated shorthand of a man who trusted his own system. Which owners had cooperated without incident, which had required what he described in his notes as additional encouragement. The clinical quality of that phrase was more unsettling to the detectives who read it than if he had used a blunter word. Investigators in Cheyenne and Laramie pulled security footage from 7 of the 11 prior locations. Business owners who had paid and stayed quiet found suddenly that there was someone official to talk to and a reasonable expectation that talking would not make their situation worse. 7 gave statements in the first week. 3 more followed. The 11th had moved out of state and took another 2 weeks to locate. Dale Pruitt was charged with 11 counts of armed robbery, 2 counts of assault, and 1 count of unlawful weapons possession. He was held without bail pending trial. His attorney entered a not guilty plea at the arraignment, which was the attorney's job, and then spent the following months in the particular quiet desperation of a defense lawyer who has seen the evidence and understands what it means for the verdict. Trent Bodecker took a plea, 3 years reduced from 7, in exchange for full cooperation and testimony. He cooperated completely and testified clearly and served his time without incident. And if he ever fully understood what had happened to him in the 45 seconds between when he crossed the waiting area and when he found himself looking at the water stains on the ceiling, he did not share that understanding with anyone who wrote it down. Delvoye Marsh took a plea as well. Similar terms, similar cooperation. He was quieter about it than Trent. He had always been quieter than Trent. The police report described the physical intervention at the scene as a confrontation with a third party. The third party was listed as Ray Callum, 63 years old, gray hair, flannel shirt. No prior convictions on record, no priors of any kind that the official record could locate, which was itself a specific kind of fact about a man, though what kind of fact depended on what you already knew about him. Nora reopened the shop 3 days after that Tuesday night. She had spent those 3 days doing what she always did when something needed to be done, which was doing it. She measured the broken display case herself and ordered the replacement glass panel from a supplier in Denver, specifying the exact dimensions and confirming the delivery date twice. She swept the floor twice before she was satisfied. She righted the overturned table and retrieved the magazines from the floor, most of which were salvageable, and stacked them the way she had grown accustomed to finding them. She rehung every tool on the pegboard in the exact positions her father had established, positions she had memorized without intending to over 22 years of working beside him. The 3/8 ratchet went back in its spot on the second row from the bottom, between the half-inch drive extension and the channel lock pliers. She hung it there and took a step back and looked at the board for a moment. Then she went back to work. On the morning of the third day, before she unlocked the front door and turned the sign in the window, she stood in the middle of the shop and let herself look at it. Just look. The way you look at something you came close to losing, not with sentiment exactly, but with a specific quality of attention that you bring to things that matter and that you have been reminded matter. Then she unlocked this door. 6 o'clock in the morning, the way it always was. The first car came off the lot at 6:20. The call from the bank came on a Thursday, 8 days after the reopening. It was not the collections department. It was the branch manager himself, a man named Garrett Finch, who had a deliberate way of speaking that suggested he chose his words the way a careful man chooses tools, for the specific purpose they were made for and no other. He said he had been following the news coverage of the arrest and wanted to speak with her directly. He said he had processed Harold Hobbs' original loan application in 1987. He said he had been at that branch for 31 years and remembered the application because Harold had come in with his tools in the back of his truck and a business plan written longhand on notebook paper and had answered every question put to him with the specific straightforwardness of a man who had decided that honesty was the most efficient approach. He said Harold had paid that loan back over 9 years without a single missed payment, using nothing but his hands and the hours in a day, and that he had watched the shop from a professional distance for a long time afterward, the way you watch something you helped put into the world and want to see continue. He said he wanted to offer Nora a restructured payment schedule at a reduced interest rate. He named the rate. He said he did not need her to decide on the call. Nora said yes before he finished the sentence. Garrett Finch was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your father would be satisfied with how you have kept that place." He said it the way you say something when you have been waiting for the right moment and have decided this is it. Then he said the paperwork would be ready by end of week and he hoped she had a good day. Nora set the phone down on the counter. She stood at the register and looked at the pegboard and breathed slowly. In, then out, then in again. Something that had been pressing on her chest for 14 months had just shifted its weight. Her body needed a moment to remember what it felt like to stand without it. Then she took the next car off the lot. Ray came in the following Wednesday at 9:15. Same time, same corner chair, same paper coffee cup from wherever he had stopped on the way over, because Nora had not yet started the pot when he arrived, and he had learned over the months that the first cup from the shop coffee maker was something to be approached with caution. The magazine on the side table was last month's issue, a notable improvement over the 8-month-old copies that had preceded it. Nora poured herself a coffee when the pot finished and went back to the bay without saying anything. Ray picked up the magazine and opened it to the middle the way he always did, as if beginning at the beginning was a convention he had long ago decided was unnecessary. They did not talk about that Tuesday night. Not then, not the Wednesday after that, not in any of the Wednesdays that followed through the winter and into the following spring. Some things between people do not require discussion to be understood by both of them. What had happened in that shop on a Tuesday night in October had been understood completely by both of them in the moment it happened, and talking about it would have added nothing to that understanding and might have subtracted something from it. What changed was small. Nora poured his coffee without being asked, not just when the pot was already made, but when it meant starting the pot early, which she began doing on Wednesday mornings without marking the decision. Ray began arriving with a better magazine, not consistently, but often enough that Nora noticed the improvement without commenting on it. These were small things. They were the language of the arrangement, which had no other language and did not need one. One evening in March, 5 months after the night in question, Nora was closing the shop alone. It was late, past 9, and she had been finishing a transmission rebuild that needed to be ready at 7 the next morning. She was at the work table beside the register, laying out the tools she would need for the morning's first hour, putting them in the order her father had taught her so that the Nora who arrived in the dark tomorrow would not have to think about where anything was, could simply reach and find. She picked up the 19-millimeter wrench, held it for a moment, then she set it down on the table, upside down. She looked at it. Nobody was in the shop. The corner chair was empty. The lot outside was dark. Route 220 was doing what it always did at this hour. The occasional truck north toward Gillette, the occasional pair of headlights south toward Rollins, the highway's own specific rhythm that had been the background of her entire life in this building. She looked at the upside-down wrench for a long time, long enough that the fluorescent light above the bay, which had finally been repaired in November, cycled through its faint residual flicker twice. Then she picked the wrench up and set it back down the right way. She did not need the signal anymore. Not because there was nothing in the world that required vigilance, not because she had decided to stop paying attention, but because something had shifted in her understanding of what the signal meant and what it was for, and what the difference was between needing someone to stay and choosing to let someone in. She had used it when she needed it. It had worked exactly the way it was supposed to work, and now she understood it differently. The way you understand a tool differently after you have used it in the exact situation it was designed for and seen what it can do. It had never been a distress signal. It had been a declaration of trust. She had made that declaration, and it had been received. And what existed between her and Ray Callum now did not require a signal because it was already present, already settled, the way the ground is settled under a building that has been standing long enough. She turned off the lights and locked the door and drove home on Route 220 and noted, as she had noted every night since November, that the street light on the eastern pole was on. Someone had finally replaced the bulb. She did not know who. She had come to appreciate it the way you appreciate things done quietly by unnamed people, with a warmth that has no particular outlet but that stays. The trial was held the following spring. Dale Pruitt sat at the defense table for 4 days and heard the evidence laid out with the methodical patience of a prosecution that had more than it needed. The phone records, the security footage from 7 prior locations, the statements from 11 business owners who had paid him and stayed quiet and who, when given the opportunity to stop staying quiet, had taken it without hesitation. His own notes, read aloud in a courtroom, in the abbreviated shorthand of a man who had trusted his system completely. He was convicted on all 14 counts, 18 years in the Wyoming State Penitentiary. He heard the sentence with the same absence of expression he had maintained through most of the trial. The face of a man who has spent enough time accounting for outcomes that he had already accounted for this one. He was transported to the penitentiary on a Wednesday in June and began serving his sentence, and Nora Hobbs learned of the verdict from the local news and noted it the way she noted most things, as information that had arrived and been processed and filed in the appropriate place. Then she went back to work. 12 months after the Tuesday night, a letter arrived at Hobbs Auto and Repair with a Wyoming State Penitentiary return address. Nora found it in the day's mail between a parts catalog and a county notice about road work on Route 220 that would affect morning traffic for 3 weeks starting the following Monday. She set the catalog and the notice on the work table and stood at the register and opened the letter. It was short. She read it once and then she read it again, standing in the same spot, and then she stood there for a moment with the letter in her hands. Dale Pruitt had not asked for anything, had not minimized anything, had not explained the long accumulation of decisions that had led him to stand in her father's shop on a Tuesday night with a gun in his hand and 2 men behind him and the absolute confidence of a man whose method had worked 11 times. He had written 4 sentences. The first said he did not expect her to read the letter, but that he needed to write it regardless. The second said he had thought about that night every day since it happened, and not in the way he had expected to think about it. The third said he had spent 11 years believing that the people he walked in on did not matter to him, and that the night in her shop was the first time he had understood this was not a true belief but a necessary one, and that the difference between those 2 things was the most important distinction he had worked out in a very long time. The fourth sentence said, "I picked your shop because I thought you were the easiest target on that road. I want you to know that was the last thing I got wrong about you." Nora read the 4th sentence a 3rd time. Then she folded the letter along its original creases and walked to the register and opened the drawer beneath the cash tray. The drawer where her father had kept the spare key to the back door. The drawer where she kept, in the back left corner, a photograph she had found in Harold's desk after he died, a photograph she had not known existed. taken by someone she had never identified. Of a Saturday morning in 1993, when Harold Hobbs was painting the shop sign by hand, and his 7-year-old daughter was sitting on an overturned oil drum watching him work. She put the letter in the drawer, next to the photograph, next to the spare key. She closed the drawer and went back to work. Ray Callum kept that corner chair for 4 more years after that Tuesday night. He was there every Wednesday at 9:15, through the winters when Route 220 went icy and the morning customers arrived half an hour late, through the springs when the ranchers brought in their fleet trucks for the seasonal work that had the same rhythm year after year, through the summers when the lot was full by 7:30, and Nora sometimes did not stop moving until well after dark. He was there on the slow Wednesdays when the two of them occupied the same space, in the particular comfortable silence of people who have run out of things they need to say to each other and have discovered that this is not a deficit, but an achievement. He was there on the difficult Wednesdays when something had gone wrong, a supplier late, a customer difficult, a piece of equipment announcing a problem at the worst possible moment. And Nora worked through it the way she worked through everything. And Ray sat in the corner chair and read his magazine and was simply present, which was sometimes the most useful thing a person could be. He was there the Wednesday after Garvey Whitlock, the parts supplier in Cheyenne who had extended Harold credit on handshake terms for 6 years, called to say that he was retiring and that his nephew was taking over the business, and that he had told the nephew to honor every arrangement Harold Hobbs had established, and that the outstanding balance would carry at the same terms Harold had agreed to, and that he hoped Nora would extend the nephew the same patience she had extended to him. Nora thanked him and said she would. She set the phone down and looked at the pegboard and breathed slowly for 30 seconds. Ray was reading his magazine. He did not look up. He did not need to. He was there the Wednesday Nora finally fixed the slight flicker in the fluorescent light above the bay, which had been developing since August of the year before the Tuesday night, and which she had been meaning to address for longer than she cared to admit. She replaced the ballast on a slow Wednesday morning, and the light came on clean and steady, and she stood under it for a moment looking up. And Ray from the corner chair said, "That is better," and Nora said, "Yes, it is." And that was the entire conversation, which was exactly the right amount of conversation for the occasion. The morning he was not there was a Wednesday in November, 4 years and 1 month after the night with Dale Pruitt. Nora arrived at the shop at 6 o'clock the way she always did. She unlocked the deadbolt, which had been serviced now and no longer stiffened in cold weather, and raised the bay door on its track, and stood for a moment in the open bay, letting the smell of the place tell her good morning the way it always did. Cold concrete and old grease, and something underneath she had never been able to name. She walked to her truck to get the work bag she had left on the passenger seat the night before. The envelope was under the wiper blade on the driver's side. White, standard size, her name written on the front in handwriting she recognized from the service log Ray had signed every week for the past 4 years. She stood in the early dark of the parking lot and opened it. Inside was a single key on a plain ring. No label, no tag, and a note. 4 words in the same handwriting. Take care of her. She stood in the lot for a long time with the key in her hand. Long enough that the sky above the Laramie Range began its slow deliberation about what kind of morning it was going to be. Long enough that the first truck of the day went north on Route 220, and its sound faded and the highway went quiet again. She knew what the key was for before she drove to Elm Street to confirm it. She knew it the way she knew most things now, not from being told, but from paying attention long enough that the knowledge arrived on its own terms. The storage unit was at the end of the second row. The key turned in the lock with the specific smoothness of a mechanism that has been maintained not because it needed maintaining, but because someone believed that maintaining things was itself worthwhile. She lifted the door and stood in the entrance and looked at what was inside. The Road King was parked against the back wall, covered with a canvas tarp, neatly fitted, the edges tucked in, the way you tuck the edges of something you are putting away with care rather than merely putting it away. She walked in and lifted the corner of the tarp and looked at the motorcycle beneath it. The tank was full. She could tell from the weight of the cap when she checked it. Every piece of the machine was in the condition that belongs to things cared for. Not because they need it, but because the caring is itself the point. She recovered the tarp and stood for a moment in the storage unit with the smell of the place, which was old concrete and a faint trace of oil, a different version of the smell she had grown up inside, but recognizable as belonging to the same family of smells, the same family of places where people had shown up and done what needed to be done and left something behind that mattered. She had the bike transported to the shop that afternoon. She cleared a space in the back corner of the bay, a spot that was not in the primary work area, not in the way of anything, but visible from the register when you looked through the open bay door the way Nora always left it. A spot where the light from the bay fixtures hit in the late afternoon at a particular angle that made things look more solid than they were, more permanent. She put the Road King there. She put the canvas tarp on the hook beside it so it was available if she ever wanted to use it. She never did. She did not ride the motorcycle. She did not put it up for sale. It stayed in the corner of the bay where she could see it from the register, the same way her father had kept certain things in the desk drawer, not because they served a daily function, but because keeping them where you could find them was itself a form of honoring what they represented. Some things do not need a purpose beyond being present. Her father had understood that. She understood it now too. October came again, the way it always did. The sky above the Laramie Range did its October thing, the light going flat in particular in the way it only did in this month, in this part of Wyoming, a quality of light that Nora had grown up with and never been able to describe to anyone who had not seen it, which she had eventually stopped trying to do. She opened the shop at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday morning and stood in the bay door for a moment and let the smell tell her good morning. Route 220 was dark, the sky just beginning to separate from the land along the ridge, the thin gray line that had not yet decided what kind of day it was going to be. The corner chair was empty. The magazine on the side table was 2 weeks old, the standard Ray had arrived at and maintained with the consistency he brought to everything. She had ordered the subscription herself in the spring without mentioning it to him. He had not mentioned it when the first issue arrived. He had simply picked it up the following Wednesday and read it without comment. That was how they handled things between them, which was the same way Harold Hobbs had handled most things, quietly, without requiring acknowledgement, because the act itself was sufficient. She made the coffee. She put the first car up on the lift. She reached for the 19-millimeter wrench on the work table and found it exactly where it always was, right side up, in the spot her father had established, and that she had maintained without thinking about it for long enough that it had stopped being maintenance and become simply the way things were. She held it for a moment, turned it over once the way Ray had turned it over the first night, that late July evening when the highway outside had gone quiet, and she had said, out loud, the things she had been carrying too long to keep carrying alone. She looked at the wrench upside down in her hand, feeling the weight of it. The 89 cents her father had paid for it at a liquidation sale in 2003. The 22 years it had spent on this table in this spot. The one night she had set it down inverted in the specific, irreversible things that had followed from that single motion. She held it a moment longer than she needed to. Then she set it back down on the table, right side up, and went to work. Outside, the streetlight on the eastern pole was on. It had been on since November, 4 years ago, since whoever had finally replaced the bulb had replaced it, and it had worked every night since without issue. Nora had never found out who arranged it. She had come to think it did not matter. What mattered was that it worked. What mattered was that the lot was lit now, the highway visible in both directions. The darkness that used to pool in the eastern corner now gone, replaced by the ordinary, sufficient illumination of something doing exactly what it was designed to do. The first customer pulled in at 6:22. A rancher in a mud-caked pickup that Nora recognized by the sound of the engine before she saw the plates. He needed the front left tire looked at. She told him to pull it into the bay. She pulled the bay door up the rest of the way and stood for a moment looking out at Route 220, at the highway going about its morning in both directions, at the sky above the Laramie Range now fully committed to whatever kind of day it had decided to be, which turned out to be a clear one. Cold and clean and certain in the way that October mornings in Wyoming are certain, as if the sky has made its decision and is no longer interested in discussing alternatives. Nora turned back to the shop. She had work to do. There was always work to do. There had always been work to do for her father before her and for her after him. And there would be work to do the next morning when she unlocked the door again at 6 o'clock and raised the bay and stood for a moment in the opening and let the smell of the place tell her what it always told her, which was that this was the place, and that she was here, and that those two facts together, without explanation, without elaboration, without anyone else needing to understand them, were entirely sufficient. She had the Harley in the corner where she could see it. She had the letter in the drawer with the photograph and the spare key. She had the wrench on the table where it belonged. She had the shop her father built, and the tools he had ordered, and the sign he had painted by hand on a Saturday morning in 1993, while a 7-year-old girl sat on an overturned oil drum and watched him work and did not yet know that she was learning, did not yet know that everything she was watching would one day be hers to carry, did not yet know that carrying it would turn out to be the thing she was made for. The bay door was up, the light was on, the rancher's truck was idling in the lot waiting for her to tell him where to put it. Nora Hobbs picked up her wrench and got to work.